We are going to be recording, and I've just started the recording this evening. The title of the monthly series is the Bray School Stories. And this evening's focus is Seeking Sylvia. So once again, we are recording this session. It will be available later on our W&M Bray School Lab YouTube channel. To find it, simply Google Bray School Lab YouTube. If you prefer not to be recorded, please feel free to access this later from our YouTube channel, or you can definitely feel free to go ahead and keep your camera off. And if you don't want to have your face recorded. The monthly sessions are designed to spark conversation. So I will share a slide and then some information, and then we'll pause to take questions or hear comments and invite you to share your thoughts about the material that's on the slide, so we don't have to wait until the end of the session for any Q&A. I'm happy to have this as kind of an open dialogue. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you again for being here. Welcome if this is your first time joining us. Looking forward to a great group this evening. So let me share this. And terrific. Okay, so Seeking Sylvia. So one thing I want to actually, before we get started on that, one thing I wanted to share with you is an upcoming program this coming Saturday. If you happen to be in the Williamsburg or Peninsula, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Hampton, Newport News area, and I believe Kristen Hill is on the call this evening. We've been doing these monthly series where I'm sharing information, things that we're finding out about the students who attended the Williamsburg Bray School. We're looking at the documents. Some of it is images of homes or the backside of homes and plantations. But we are also looking at different ways of sharing this story out. And this is William and Mary's Year of the Arts. It's also what we're considering the Year of the Bray School. So we have this wonderful, happy coincidence that Kristen Hill, the teacher at the Academy for Discovery at Lakewood in Norfolk, also is the leader of the dance troupe. And they came to us and said, this Williamsburg Bray School is a great story that needs to be shared, and we want to do it in dance. And so this Saturday, you have an opportunity to see this middle school dance production in Norfolk. It's free. It's at 2 o'clock on Saturday. Tanya and I and a couple other folks from the lab were able to see a preview last fall. It moved us to tears. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful way to see this story played out, what the students have done to bring kind of life to this story is just amazing. So I share that with you as a different way to experience this story, and encourage you, if you're able to go and join us on Saturday afternoon. So that's the plug there. I just didn't want to wait till the end to share that, and wanted to make sure we put that out in front. So we'll get back to what we're here for this evening, and that is Seeking Sylvia. And we start where we always start. We start with the attendance list. Now, Sylvia is listed on the 1765 attendance list. She's described as Mr. Waters' Sylvia. So she is an enslaved young girl. The 1765 list doesn't give us her age, but we know from what Robert Carter Nicholas says in his letter, he's guessing that the children attending that year are between the ages of 4 and 10. So that gives us a little bit of a range on Sylvia's age. So her approximate year of birth then is between 1755 and 1761. So on this list, we also see someone else that we have discussed, and that's Mrs. Prentice's Molly, and also Isaac B. We've had some previous sessions talking about them, and so we're highlighting Sylvia here. Any questions while now that we've gotten started? I want to make sure you can see my screen and want to make sure that you can see the information that's being shared. Okay. Great. All right, moving on. So we talk a lot about the community that the Bray School students would have been a part of. They're a part of the Williamsburg community. They're a part of an enslaving community. They are part of a household or even a neighborhood in Williamsburg. And I want to shout out, kudos to Nicole Brown and our partners at Colonial Williamsburg. Nicole was able to take the information that we know about the different households, the different enslaving households, and really put this onto a map of Williamsburg as it would have been in the 1780s. And we were able to then show where each of these students is living and also share a little bit of information on them. So scanning here, you can go to the map. I'm going to show you a close-up of where Sylvia and the Waters family would have been. And I can also, no, I'm going to go ahead onto the next screen. This is a close-up of where you see the blue houses are different structures in Williamsburg, but the red are homes where we know that Williamsburg Bray School students lived. And in this particular block, this corner of Duke of Gloucester Street and North Botetourt Street is the highest concentration of Williamsburg Bray School students in those households. And so if you were able to join us on the walk during Descendants Week, the walking tour of Williamsburg and Colonial Williamsburg, we stopped at several different locations where Williamsburg Bray School students would have lived. And so here we have where Sylvia's living. And when you go to that map, and if you click on the red homes, this information box will pop up. So you see a photograph of the household, the house, the structure. A little bit of information. There's Sylvia and what year the attendance list that her name appears on, the name of her enslaver. And soon we'll be able to add more information to this information box. But I wanted to show you just kind of what other assets are out there to be able to explore, to learn more about the Williamsburg Bray School and the students. We see right across the street, Molly, who was also on the 1765 list. And we kind of imagine, what is this like? This is a neighborhood, this is a community. Are the students who are attending the school, what friendships are being formed? So those are some of the questions that we would love to be able to have answers to. We just do that wondering. But any questions right now or comments about the map, about the information that's already shared, for Sylvia, for Molly, any reflections on this?
Elizabeth, I know that you are giving your presentation, so I put the link to the map page on the Colonial Williamsburg website, and then click the actual link that takes you directly to the map. So both of those links are in the chat.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm kind of going between screens, so I really appreciate that. Thank you. All right. All right, we're going to keep moving on then. So, but before I do, actually, I just really want to stress this idea of community, that these children were not just attending school and then nameless as they returned home. They had community. They were building relationships either within the households or also within the neighbors and the neighboring households. And this is going to become a little bit more, we're going to talk a little bit more about that community as we move along this evening. So there we go. All right. So after the attendance list, the next place we start is looking into we always have to look at the enslaving family and their records. And sure enough, almost in the same year that Sylvia is attending the school is when William Waters, her enslaver, writes his will. So we have the name of his wife is Sarah Waters, And we also have the name of his daughter, Sarah. Now, Sylvia is not mentioned by name in his will. And we know that everything was to go to his estate was going to be going to his wife, but also he needed to pay off some of his debts. And so we are left with very little information specifically about Sylvia. But as always, we look at the wills first to see what we can learn about the family makeup and really the situation of where Sylvia was living. So we know Sylvia was in the Waters household, and we know that William was married to Sarah, and there was a daughter, Sarah. And Sarah herself was born, the daughter was born around 1750. So we're thinking that she is a peer, not a peer, but close in age to enslaved Sylvia. So any questions at this point for what we're looking at? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. We're looking, so John Tazewell places an ad in 1768 in March. And this makes your heart stop because it is he is advertising a slave sale. 11 slaves are being sold that were the personal estate of William Waters. And so they're not named. We don't have any record of who was being sold and who they were being sold to, who purchased them. And so it makes you worry it made me worry, are we hitting a dead end already at this point with Sylvia? What happened to her? And we're talking valuable slaves. And when we talk about the education that Sylvia and the other girls were getting at the Williamsburg Bray School, did that education increase her perceived value among enslavers and people who were going to be purchasing slaves at these auctions? So what we're doing, so right now we've looked at a will, and we're looking at ads, anything having to do and be connected with William Waters. So this was soon after William Waters died. And so this was public auction in Williamsburg. So any questions before we move on? There is a little bit of good news, I will tell you that. So we'll move on to the next slide. We know that in the estate records starting in 1768, we know that not all of the enslaved people were sold at that estate auction, because we see that even in April, the estate is paying James Cook for clothing for the enslaved. And again, later on, they're paying William Pierce for additional clothing. And then we also see that Mrs. Waters spent almost the largest amount of money purchasing sundries at the sale. Normally, we would expect to see, if she's purchasing any enslaved people from her husband's estate, we would hope to see names like that, but unfortunately in these estate records, we don't. And for those who were here, who were on the call earlier before we really got started, I was talking about the fact that it's been very difficult to find information on Sylvia. But we hold out hope that because there is still clothes being purchased for enslaved people, that perhaps Sylvia was still a part of the household. So any questions, any comments,
Elizabeth, I looked away for a minute. Was the question about Sylvia's biological relations, was that answered? Is Sylvia biologically related to Waters?
I didn't see that question, and thanks for raising it. Right now, we don't have any evidence of that. But let me go to the next slide, because we are able to say who her mother is. And it's actually a really good question. Could Sylvia have been the biological daughter of William Waters? We don't know. It's certainly something to consider. And it's certainly something we've been considering with with each of the Bray School students, especially if they are described as being mulatto or mixed race. So let me go to the next slide, because what we are able to find is in the inventory that was done in 1769, we do see, though, that there is a Marcia or Marcia and her children, Sylvia and Fancy, valued at 70 pounds. And we do believe that this is perhaps the same Sylvia, which would then now connect her with her mother, Marcia or Marcia. I've heard both, and I've also seen Marcia spelled with an SH as well. But that doesn't really answer the question whether or not Mr. Waters was the father of both Sylvia and Fancy and any of the other enslaved people in his household. We haven't seen any indication in any wills of any, sometimes in wills you would see allowances for making sure that biological children might have been taken care of in a certain way or been being passed to particular family members. And we just don't see Sylvia named that way. And we don't see Marcia or Fancy named that way. I do also, while we're looking at this inventory, want to also point out the other people in the household. We have a woman named Nanny and her children, Molly and Aberdeen and George. There's a woman named Hannah and a girl, Sarah, and a man, Jack, and a boy, Will. And when we talk a lot about some of the rules that were in place for the Williamsburg Bray School, or maybe even the intention of the Bray Associates, the intention was that the children who were attending the school were to go back to their community and share that information, share the knowledge, the education that they were getting, the Anglican catechism, as well as that sewing and knitting. They were to be models. The children were to be models for their household. So these are the community of people that Sylvia is returning to. But we also want to recognize that Sylvia is not starting the school completely empty-headed. These people and her mother and her sister, she's been surrounded by them and is learning lessons way before she ever enters the school building. And so we always ask ourselves, how was the education that they were getting at the Williamsburg Bray School enhancing the education they were already receiving from their families and from their community in that household? So any comments, any questions, any feedback?
Not yet.
Okay. All right, moving on. So this is the last time we see Sylvia. 15 years, it's been very difficult to actually find information about Sarah Waters in the 1770s in York County, Williamsburg County, or even James City County records. And of course, we check all three of those areas. We don't really see Sarah Waters again, along with names of enslaved people, until the 1784 personal property tax list. That's 15 years later. And at this point, we have Sarah Waters with Marcia and Fancy, and then Aberdeen. So only 3 enslaved members now in her household. So the big question then is, what happened to Sylvia? Because she's dropped down to a much smaller household than she had before. Was there a comment? Was there a question? Did I hear something? So in order to figure out, we know that Sylvia was in the household in 1769 and that she wasn't sold in that initial slave auction. So then the question is, we need to figure out what's going on with the family. And what we know is that Sarah, so we have to kind of look a little more broadly at the family connections to see where Sylvia could have gone if Sylvia was going to have moved between family members. So we talked earlier about just the proximity of the Prentice household to the Waters household and how close Sylvia and Molly lived to each other on that stretch of Duke of Gloucester Street. William Waters married Sarah Prentice. So already the Waters and the Prentice families are related. They're related. And so Sylvia and Molly, being neighbors and also students together at the Bray School, this family and the two enslaving families are pretty intertwined. And so we know then that William, because of his will, has a daughter named Sarah, presumably named after his wife, after her mother. And so we start to look at the connection between the Waters family and the Prentice family. And then we also look to see where the Sarah Waters family is going to expand. And what we find is that let me make sure I get the date right. In 1768, the same year as the inventory, the same year as as Mr. Waters writing his will, the same year of 3 years after Sylvia attends the Williamsburg Bray School, Sarah Waters marries a David Mead. And the Mead family and the Waters family and the Prentice family are pretty tight, pretty close friends and family at this point. And so any number of these people is where we would start to track Sylvia. So is this all making sense so far, or have I lost everybody?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good.
But it may look like that maybe Sylvia could have been given to Sarah Waters and became part of the Waters Mead household.
Yeah, that's the theory that we're working with. And I do want to mention that a lot of this research that is going to be presented almost from here on out is I'm very much indebted to Ken Levine and Martha Gunn, who have been really trying to find Sylvia and looking deeply into the David Mead papers. And Ken, anytime you want to chime in, please feel free to do so. But Teddy, you're right. The theory that we've been working on is that Sylvia would have been passed along to Sarah Waters, and now we need to look deeply into the David Mead records. Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah. All right. So what we find, we have two big examples of just that interconnectedness. I'm not going to spend too long on kind of like the White family and their interconnectedness, but we see that Elizabeth Prentice, who had been in the enslaver of Molly, she dies at David Mead's home in Nansemond County. And so again, we just find evidence of how close these two families are. In 1796, David Mead writes to Joseph Prentice, that's Elizabeth Prentice's brother. And so a long, lengthy letter that we're going to touch on a little bit later. But just that interconnectedness of the families in Williamsburg and that interconnectedness of the enslavers at the Williamsburg Bray School. And so we really do expand and look deeply at all these different connections for any evidence of where we could find information about the students themselves. So let me go ahead on to, in 1775, David Mead is selling some enslaved people from his property in Manchester. Now, David Mead has a lot of properties in a lot of different areas in Virginia. So it is a matter of looking at each of those. And I still need to really do a little bit more of a deeper dive into David Mead's family records. But again, this kind of makes you go, pause. In 1775, there are female house servants that are part of this sale. And again, if we don't know where Sylvia went after 1769, could she have been with Sarah and with David Mead on their primary household, or could she have been moved to different pieces of his plantation? So we're trying to do that exhaustive search that is so necessary in this genealogical research. So again, this is evidence of, could Sylvia have been a part of this? And we just don't know at this point. So just to kind of prepare you, the rest of the presentation this evening is really going to be a lot of where all have we looked And where has there been evidence of named enslaved people with David Mead's records? And where have we not found Sylvia? So
Elizabeth,
A
Elizabeth,
question in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry. There was a question in the chat, Elizabeth. What was David Mead's connection to the Everard household? And then I'm sorry, whomever I cut off, forgive me.
Okay.
I'm right behind me.
okay,
I'm Ken Levine. I'm the one who keep unfortunately there are a number of David Meads. Besides Ann Mead, he had a couple, there was a couple of brothers, and they named their children David Mead. So
right.
there's a bunch of Meads. So I'm not sure if this is the David Mead is the right David Mead,
Okay,
or it's possible he had a bunch of property he inherited from his father. But the Meads were in Brunswick County and up also near Winchester, and they all named their kids David Mead. The names appear over and over again. So
okay.
I'm not sure which household this is. But getting to the other question, David Mead was the son of Sir Richard Everard. Well, his father was
No,
married
no.
the daughter of Richard Everard and Susanna Kidder. That's David Mead 1, and then this is David Mead 2.
Right, let me go ahead and back to that. I'll go back to the family tree so we can see. There we go. So, whoops. There we are. So the David Mead who married Sarah Waters is the son of David Mead and Susanna Everard. And for Williamsburg people who have done a lot of research, you know that there's a Thomas Everard. Yes, is it Thomas?
Not related.
Not related.
No, Richard. Her father was Richard Everard, who was a viscount, and he appointed lieutenant governor of North Carolina for a year or so,
He was the governor of North Carolina.
and then went back to England where he died.
Right, right.
And his son went back to England and died also.
Not lieutenant.
He was a lieutenant governor. There was
Right.
no.
So the Everard, who is the clerk of York County and also an enslaver of a Williamsburg Bray School student, is a different Everard family. But you know, these names keep getting, keep popping up. So of course we do make sure that, what are the connections. So I think I saw a hand up. Was Bonnie?
I think it was
Did you have a
Bonnie.
question?
Uh-oh.
Do we miss her? Oh, and Teddy's got a question. No?
Me? Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I can talk. Okay.
Sure.
You know what? In that advertisement, I'm thinking, is that in any way a hint it's a hint about 100 Virginia born? Is that a hint for chronology or what? I'm just saying, because they point out a Virginia born,
Right.
not people who have recently immigrated, been forced to immigrate to North America. I didn't know
Okay.
that was a hint anyway, it's a hint to me.
It's a good thing to point out. Yeah,
Because for them
absolutely.
to point that out like that, I got some Virginia born Black
Right,
people.
that was to denote that they had already been assimilated into the culture.
Correct. They can
and
speak
would need to
English.
be-
You don't
right,
have to,
right.
you don't have to do sign language or anything.
Yeah, so
Wear
that's the reason.
clothes, they wear shoes, blah,
Right,
blah,
right,
blah, and they can
right.
cook and do hair. So that when I saw that, it just jumped out at me. Mhm.
I
It's
love
also
it.
like a marketing tool, right? It's like
Right.
a marketing tool for the slave people. Selling
Right.
clothes. Okay, I'm done.
Okay. So,
Thank you for
Did we-
showing me that, because I'm gonna share that with some of my genealogist friends when they see that.
okay. And did we lose Bonnie? I don't remember Bonnie, if you still have a question, please, or a comment or a reflection.
Yeah, look, I was trying to figure out how to unmute again.
Okay.
I actually have a thought that's kind of out there. Whenever I do research, I look at the other family members. I also look at the names, because African Americans really are, they name people in honor of someone or that means something. And the names, Aberdeen in the Hampton area was a community that was established for Blacks. And Nansemond, isn't Nansemond County down in that Tidewater area?
Mhm.
Okay, so when you look at her sister, Aberdeen, how did she get that name? Did they have that land, back then, was that territory considered all of that in that area? So I'm looking at, Aberdeen is not an everyday name, and it means water, something with dealing with the water. And it's the Water family. It's just there's too many coincidences for it
Wow.
not to have meant something to me.
It's
So that's all I got to say.
yeah, no, that's it. I mean, it's an interesting, yeah, I'd have to figure out when that area of Hampton would have been considered Aberdeen. We do know that there is a pattern of some of these upper class or high society enslaving families who are coming from England and from Scotland, naming some of their enslaved people after towns or areas in England or Scotland. We see that with London and Shropshire, and my guess had always been that that's where Aberdeen came from. But if Aberdeen is also associated with water, that's like
And it's in Hampton. And that's a
it's in
community
Hampton.
that started in Hampton. And it's that area, Nansemond. I'm just wondering, was that ever part of Nansemond County?
Well,
So it's
Nansemond
something that
County,
they say,
Nansemond County is now Suffolk.
okay,
And
but back then the territory was wider.
right.
So,
But William Waters, though, was born and raised in the Eastern Shore of Virginia, and then came to Williamsburg directly.
okay.
And he still had a couple of plantations in the Eastern Shore where I guess he was sending goods, because next to the house is the Waters storehouse. So I'm presuming he's importing stuff to sell.
And it was the Meade family that was living in Nansemond, but obviously
Right, and they're the Scottish. I mean, Irish. Was it Irish? Irish. The grandfather was Andrew Meade. He came from Ireland.
Mhm.
right.
But that was long after. I mean, the connection to the Meads was long after Aberdeen was named. So there would have been no connections to that.
Right.
Well, that's true. However, when Black families name their family members,
Right.
they have some reason, usually, whether it's a connection to the land or another relative or an area. We have a naming convention, or they will make up a name that's a combination of different people. So you gotta think
What century are you talking, Ms. Johnson?
in different centuries, and even now, it's more nowadays. People make up names using combinations of things that are familiar or people that are familiar. But back then, our family's names, a mother could name her daughter the same thing. And there was a time when women were considered Yvonne Jr. or, so you gotta think like the culture that you're talking about when you're talking about the name.
Okay.
I got a question.
Okay.
The
Thank you,
same-
Bonnie, by the way. Thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate that. That helps.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I learned something there. The same advertisement is speaking to me. So does anybody know if David Meade, to me, appears to be under financial difficulties? Because he's offering 12 months credit, right, for the purchase. I've seen 3 months in my travels. I've seen 2 months. I've seen no months. But here he's giving out 12 months. So he's really, so is that, Elizabeth, anybody who's used to seeing these advertisements? Are you used to, is it more common for them to give such extended credit?
That's a real good question, Teddy, and I'm not really well versed on how to answer that. As
Because,
far as
because
David,
it shows me if he's putting up 100, he's doing a strong marketing thing. I got 100 Black people born in Virginia, and guess what? I'm gonna give you payment over time. It
Right.
sounds like he's in a little financial bind. He's he's
Right.
a motivated seller.
right.
So that helps with where our enslaved people are going. That's what I'm saying.
Right, right. We see another, thank you, Teddy. We see another hand raised. Angela? Would you like to?
Yeah, yes, I'm a little bit curious with the discussion of naming. I wasn't always 100% sure that enslaved people had the right to name their own children because they were property. So I just wondered if somebody could speak to that. Did families always have that right to name
Oh,
children? Or were they
yes.
sometimes named by the
The enslaver, right?
enslaver?
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm. You're right, Angela.
Right, and it may not be that they changed their name necessarily after emancipation, but they took on the name that they had always had as their own name. Whether or not the enslaver had recognized that as their name. So thank you, Denise. Great discussion this evening. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I'm looking at the clock and I've got a few more slides to share. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So let's see if I can get this to go. There we go. So as always, and you all who have been on my calls before know that I definitely go to the personal property tax records. And I always extol the virtues of the Virginia property tax lists about how in 1783 and 84 and 86, the names of the enslaved people in the households would have been listed in the property tax list. Not so for David Mead in Prince George County, where he and his wife Sarah ended up moving to a plantation called Maycox. And so their plantation was right on the other side of the James River, across from William Byrd's plantation in Charles City County. And just one county away, they did not name the people in the household. But we do know from these three lists that David Mead did have a sizable number of enslaved people in his home or on his plantation. 23 people over the age of, let me make sure I get this right because they changed the, yes, it was 23 over the age of 16 and 17 people above the age of 12 but under 16 in his household. And that number stayed pretty steady over those 3 years. But again, I was disappointed to learn that Prince George County tax list taker did not bother to follow the pattern of other counties in Virginia and did not name the enslaved people in his home. So again, we're left wondering whether Sylvia is among the 23 or by 1786, the 26 people in the household. So, any comments or questions on the tax records? He did have about 500 acres at Maycox. It was a rather large working plantation. And that was, again, just one of the properties that he had. That was in Prince George County, Virginia. I'm going to go ahead and move on. So then, Teddy, you touched on something about his financial situation. What we do know is that in 1790, he has an indenture with his niece, Susanna Eldridge, in which he names several slaves that he is going to give to her. And among the names, we do not find Sylvia. So again, it's always this, oh, we found a record and the names enslaved people. And again, Sylvia is not there. In this case, it's Saraner and her children, George, James, Charles, Mary, and Moses. Annis and her children, Hagar, Sally, Quee, maybe, or Key. I don't, someone knows how to pronounce that. That'd be great if you could tell me. Will, Ned, Patty, and Selah. So again, this is in 1790, and in 1790, we would expect Sylvia to be between the ages of about 29 to 35 years old. So was she
Excuse
still
me, that name is Guy.
Guy? Okay, because it looked like a Q to me.
It's not.
Okay. Okay. All right, so Guy. So this is in Rico County, Virginia records, and but it's, so while it's recorded in Henrico County, it is still saying that David Meade of Maycox in the county of Prince George. So we know that he is still living there. And so if we're trying to track Sylvia and we think that she's a part of that household, we've moved from the Williamsburg area now just across the river into Prince George County. Any questions, comments about the indenture? Ken, do you have any other information about that you'd like to share about this
No.
document?
No,
So that's when they moved to.
no, we're
Kentucky.
fine with it.
Okay, terrific. Yes, Teddy.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
You know, this period of time that we're working in spans the part where we're not a colony, we become the United States. So becoming the United States, does that have any effect on your research, on how you're researching, what you're using to research? Because it's now a state. Virginia's a state,
Right, right.
no longer a colony.
Only so far as really just kind of like which counties, how to track the counties, trying to track migration patterns and movement. The rivers, we always consider as the highways,
Yes.
because it was easier to get around on those. And so while we think that going across the river seems like it's a huge boundary and a barrier, it's actually not. And so it's not unusual to think that somebody who lives in Prince George County across the other side of the river, we wouldn't want to look there because it's so far away. It's not really that far away. And it's so it's just a matter of really knowing, as far as my research goes,
Yes.
really the county formations.
I
And
said because a lot of counties, when it became the United States, they did the surveys. A lot of the county sizes, as well as some were cut off. They was, cut off and became something else. So I was just wondering.
Yeah.
That would affect you. You would have to know your geography.
Absolutely,
Well,
absolutely.
But all these records are by county. These are not state records.
Right, that's true. That's true. So while we're tracking the movements of the families, we just have to keep track of which county they're in and where those things would have been recorded. So, and Henrico County is north near Richmond. Ken, any idea why this was recorded in Henrico County if the two parties in the deed are of Prince George County and Powhatan?
Powhatan.
Powhatan, I'm not
Powhatan,
sure. I mean, he's a lot of times there might be multiple records of these because I'm getting, like records in Virginia listing him in Kentucky, but there's also records in Kentucky. So I think they write it in one place and they send it to another place, and the original one may have not gotten recorded. He's also using his brother-in-law as a lawyer, and I think he might be in Richmond or in Henrico, and
that makes sense. So yeah, so understanding just the dynamics of the family, I think you brought up a really good point. Knowing who all the players are and also what their roles are and also where everybody's living and how where you're recording things. I've seen this before, and especially in marriages, people will go across the state line to get a marriage license because maybe the courthouse on the other side of the state line or the county line is much closer for them than having to go to the county courthouse. So sometimes things are in other places that we wouldn't have expected, but if we know kind of where people are actually situated, and where the county boundaries are, the state boundaries are, that can also help kind of give us ideas of where to look for records. Absolutely.
Can I just say one more thing again?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, from that, again, from the area point of view, Kentucky was a part of Virginia when it was one of the colonies. And Henrico County I live in Henrico County, but I live in Richmond. And until they had a fight over the water rights, I still live in Richmond, but I'm in Henrico County. And Henrico County even went over the E9 bridge called Henrico. So it just depends on the time that you're talking about.
Okay, right. And so normally what I try to do in these sessions, but also in my own research, is really track a timeline, because we have to be able to track what time period are we looking at. It's a really good point, Bonnie. I really appreciate you. It is just kind of timeline. Does it make sense? You know, what's the gap in the time, and what's happening, what context is, you know, what's happening on the ground and in the governments of, you know, what they're deciding on those locations at those particular time periods. Thank you. Yeah. So, all right, so we have one more deed to show before, so in 1791, a year later, again in Prince George County, David Mead is, he has a sale of 17, he mentions 17 slaves, but I've counted them a number of times in this record, and I keep coming up with 18, but he's saying that the following 17 slaves he's selling because of a debt. He needed to raise some money, and so he sells these slaves to pay a debt. And again, we see a list of names of Alexander and Hayden, Jupiter, Roger, Dick, Peter, Peg and her son Harry, Violet and her son Jack, Sam, Betty, Halifax, Moll, Jenny, Hatch, Robin, and Stephen. But again, no Sylvia, and not even a name that could, I don't even, be similar to Sylvia. And so again, do we think that Sylvia is still staying with the family? Or have we really lost her at this point before all of this is happening? But this is another example of other records where we're finding David Mead and finding names of enslaved people in his household. What's going to happen in 1796 is he's going to move. He and his household are going to move. And a few slides ago, we talked about a letter that David Mead wrote to Joseph Prentice. And at that point, he writes this long, long letter about his trip from Virginia into land in Kentucky that he had sent his son forward ahead of him to purchase acres and acres of land in Kentucky. And so we are left wondering, did Sylvia make the trip with him by any chance? So we don't have a mention of Sylvia, although we know that from his letter that about 50 people are traveling to Kentucky, and his family's large, but it's not that large. So we know that enslaved people are going with him. And so the only enslaved person that he mentions by name is Henry, and that is his house servant. Interestingly enough, and this is going back to that interconnectedness of the Williamsburg Bray School enslavers, George Nicholas is mentioned in this letter, and George Nicholas was the son of Robert Carter Nicholas, who of course was the trustee for the Bray School. He also mentions David Ross because he's talking about the quality of iron that he's able to purchase. And David Ross is a huge ironworks person. David Ross also happened to have purchased Bray School scholar Roger from the Peyton Randolph estate. And so as we are doing this research and we're going through it, we start to see other names being pulled in. And how are people connected? I mean, it's fascinating. It doesn't help right now. We still haven't found Sylvia. But keeping all of these names in mind, keeping track of the movement of the people and people associated with the Williamsburg Bray School as this story is starting to spread farther away from just Williamsburg and even just the surrounding counties, so that we could start to, now we're, looking into Kentucky records to see if there's any chance that Sylvia is going to be named. By 1796, Sylvia is getting to be, well, she's about probably in her early 40s at this point, give or take a few years. So any mention, any thoughts, any reflections on anything that's just been shared about movement of people, interconnectedness of Bray School folks. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So the last thing is that we find is, oh, I'm sorry, Denise, you had your hand raised, please.
While you were looking for Sylvia from the first sale, did you research surrounding counties or territories that they may have purchased those slaves from border sale or the subsequent other sales that took place, to see if perhaps she had been bought by someone out of the immediate area?
And so I'm not sure what records would exist to tell me the other side of that purchase. Normally on an estate account, we would see the list of purchasers from a certain estate. We don't have that record here. At least I haven't come across that record yet to show that side of the purchase. As for the other side of the purchase, I'm not sure what records and where they would be for that. Does that?
From the advertisement, initial advertisement, and then subsequent sale, there weren't any documents that could tell you where the slaves went.
Right.
When I was searching around, I was using Family Search, and in their test thing that you had mentioned last month, you just put in his name and it shows up all the transactions in any county that they have records of, and they have records of almost every county in the country, if not the world, it seems. Also, I did one on Sylvia, and she shows up in like one document, but it was totally not her. But it just didn't show up. And this is a search of text of deeds and wills and whatever, and Sylvia just didn't show up.
Right. Yeah.
Which makes me wonder if she didn't survive, if she died somewhere between the subsequent ones.
Right. It's always a possibility that she didn't survive. It could also, I mean, so many other things were happening in Williamsburg in those 1770s. It just feels like there's just kind of a gap in the 1770s in that time period. And we also have to recognize that there was so much going on. We're talking right up against the Revolutionary War. During the Revolutionary War time, could things have gotten, could she have been swept up in that in some way? Could she have gotten ill? Could she have died in childbirth? We don't know. I mean, these are all possibilities. But until we've exhausted the research, we didn't want to give up hope that she might turn up in a record. Yeah. So I'm going to go on to David. Yes, Meredith.
Hi. So speaking of so many things happening in Williamsburg at the time, do you think she was like Eve, who was in the Peyton Randolph household, that she might have gone to, say, Cornwallis's army or joined the British per the Dunmore Proclamation during the Revolution?
Certainly a possibility. Thank you for bringing that up. We don't have a good record like we did in the Randolph estate records that mention that. We have looked at the records of the what's called the Book of Negroes, where the Black loyalists, that list came from, who went to Nova Scotia, who part of the evacuation in 1783. We don't have any indication that Sylvia did that. That doesn't mean she didn't. And we also know that there was this huge smallpox outbreak around that same time that people were going to Dunmore's army. And so again, we don't know if perhaps she did get caught up in part of that as well. But it's a good point.
Awesome. Thank you.
Welcome.
Do you have time to expand on Dunmore's army? Because that's not something I'm familiar with.
Not now, but I can definitely send you some links to that if that's something you're curious about. If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to pull some information together for you on that, but definitely not in the context for this evening. So,
Okay.
yeah. So then we started obviously with the will of William Waters. Now we're at the time of the will of David Mead, and this is 1829. So we've jumped huge leaps in time at this point. Sylvia would have been about 68 to 74 years old. In his will, he actually specified that he wanted no appraisement of the property, real or personal. Whether his executors have fulfilled that wish or not, it meant for me that that was going to be no inventory, no list of his property. A couple other things did stand out from his will to me. Again, we have no name. Sylvia is not mentioned. There is a small mention that son William Mead received legacies from his grandmother Sarah. So that we would love to have seen Sarah Waters' will or estate inventory, but I have not come across any record of her. We know that from the personal property tax records, Sarah Waters, this is William Waters' widow. Sarah Waters was in Williamsburg. She is alive up until about 1809, where all of a sudden her tax entry goes from Sarah Waters to Sarah Waters' estate. So somewhere in that time frame, it's that 1808, 1809 time frame is when we believe she's passed away. We do know that from David Mead's will that there were men that he did free, Billy, Hampton, Hayden, Jupiter, and Peter. Oddly enough, some of these were the same names from the 1791 deed. And so are they the same people? And something happened after that 1791 deed that he got them back? Or are these just people who happen to have the same name, or perhaps they are family members of those people who were sold? So I'm cognizant of the time. I want to go ahead and make sure that we go to the next slide, which is always our research questions and next steps. So have we researched all of David Mead's property in Virginia? I have not. So that is on me for next steps. And just like we said, what information can we find out about the slave sale in 1775? Do we need to go back and really start looking at some of those other records? More importantly, can we retrace the steps in Williamsburg of Sarah Waters' household and research Sylvia's mother and her sister and their descendants? So unlike a lineage society, the descendants that we're searching for don't have to be direct bloodlines. So could we look at Sylvia's mother? Could we look at her sister and find descendants of those people? Should we be, and that would be my next step, is to really look at Marcia, and Fancy, and see what we can learn about them here in the Williamsburg area. And so I see that we've got some either questions or comments in the chat. I definitely want to make sure we get to that. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to be respectful of the time. We have already just passed 7 o'clock. Want to make sure that if you don't already know, and if you aren't already signed up for it, we have our new William and Mary Bray School Lab bulletins. It's our weekly newsletter, and you can sign up by going to the QR code here on the slide. And obviously, you can certainly feel free to stay in touch with us either through email, visiting our website, and watching the recordings on the YouTube of previous channels, and following us on social media. I'm going to go ahead back to this so people have a chance to that QR code, but thank you so much for being here. I'm definitely happy to stay on for a little bit longer if there are questions or comments, things that I can help answer, or just things we want to talk about, things that came up out of tonight's conversation.
And Elizabeth, I want to let you know the two links I just put in the chat to Encyclopedia Virginia, one on Lord Dunmore's proclamation, and
Thank
one
you.
a broader profile on who Lord Dunmore was. So if people want to grab that information, click on those links. But definitely Encyclopedia Virginia is a great, easy reading site to find out more information.
Thank you. Perfect. Oh, that you were on it. All right. Yes, Teddy.
Teddy. Yeah.
Oh, say, listen, when the Mead household went to Kentucky, I didn't catch that year. Was Sarah Waters still alive? Or the daughter? I mean, who was going? Were they going to Kentucky?
So yes, David Mead went with his wife Sarah
Oh.
to Kentucky.
Oh, okay, so she was alive.
Yeah.
Okay, to Kentucky. Thank you.
Yep.
Got it.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. If everybody's had a chance to, if you wanted to, click on the QR code. Should I keep that up or should I stop sharing? How are we feeling about that?
I'm okay, because I got the bulletin. so
You got it.
I don't need the QR code.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. Ooh,
And
my
as
goodness.
always, you can always email braylab@wm.edu and ask to be put on the email list as well.
Right.
It was
Okay.
really very, very good, Elizabeth. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And that
Thank you
little
all for
survey
being
there.
here.
Mhm. She could have gone a whole lot of different directions.
I know. Yeah. We don't want to give up. And so, and I appreciate the fact that people still are interested in attending the sessions, even when we haven't found very much information, because the suggestions that people have raised this evening have really sparked some new thoughts for me, ways to kind of either think about the documents, think about other documents that might be available, other places where they might be available. So I thank you very much, everybody who's contributed to the conversation this evening. Thank you.
Yeah.